Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, June 10th, 2015, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pow on a Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick program note, Alex Newman, one of the authors of Crimes of the Educator, will be our guest on the show next Tuesday, the 16th, in our third hour, talking about how the educational system has been hijacked away from education and totally into indoctrination, dumbing down of the population, turning our children into mindless worker drones who will do what they're told without question for the benefit of the state. And we'll be talking about Common Core and a bunch of other abuses of our young people. Turning to the international news, Israel is enraged with the United States of America over Obama's plan to supply advanced weapons to the other Arab states. And this is a case of hoisting with your own petard, because Israel was out there screaming about the dangers of Iran, even though Iran has not initiated a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years. And Israel went around to all the other Arab nations and said, you've got to be worried, you've got to be concerned about this whole thing, trying to derail the P5+1. So Obama goes to those Arab states and says, don't worry about Iran. We're keeping an eye on them. There's no evidence they're building a nuclear weapon. We're going to prevent them from building a nuclear weapon. And just to relax you, we will supply you with advanced weapon systems to defend yourself against the possibility that Iran is going to attack you. And, of course, this is absolutely not what Israel wanted, because at the moment, supported by your tax dollars, Israel has a significant military superiority over its neighbors. That's why it's constantly invading them. Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, what have you. They've got a clear superiority in weapons provided by the American taxpayer. And now, all of a sudden, Israel is seeing that huge gap between their military and all of their neighbors starting to shrink. And they did it to themselves, hoisted with their own petard, and now they're very, very angry because Israel's attitude is, you only give advanced weapons to us, you don't give it to those gosh darn Arab Muslims. Meanwhile, Dempsey is out there saying, I couldn't imagine a world without a U.S.-Israel alliance. And he's out there, well, let's just ask the crew of the USS Liberty if they could imagine a world without the U.S.-Israel alliance. And as a side note, Dempsey was making this comment while getting the Israeli Badge of Honor Award in Israel. And apparently, that little piece of ribbon and pot metal was his price to sell out the Americans killed when Israel attacked the USS Liberty and tried to frame Egypt for it. Now, the CIA chief, we mentioned this yesterday, the CIA chief, John Brennan, has been over in Israel to talk about the Iran nuclear talks, supposedly to brief Israel's government on what's going on. Well, that's ridiculous. Israel's government knows what's going on. They can read a newspaper, and Kaspersky Security has found Israeli spy software in all the hotels being used by the P5+1 negotiators. Israel knows what's going on. Brennan is in Israel to work with Israel's intelligence agencies to figure out some way to scuttle the talks and open the path to war. Remember, when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this whole dollarification of the Middle East, Iran was last on the list of to be conquered, and that was scheduled for 2008. So they're way, way, way behind schedule right now. Yesterday we were talking about how Israel was test detonating dirty bombs out in the Negev desert, some 20 all told, under the claim that they needed to learn how to clean up after a dirty bomb had gone off. I don't think you need a total of 20 for that. And I speculated, we're looking at a possible false flag attack. And sure enough, just today we got a story out of The Independent in Great Britain. ISIS's dirty bomb. Jihadists have seized enough radioactive material to build their first weapon of mass destruction. So they're already out there selling this idea. There's going to be a dirty bomb go off someplace, and they're going to blame Iran, Muslims in general, Arabs in general for it. and try and whip up a war fever in the American people. Yes, take my money, take my children, throw them onto those gosh darn Muslims. And they're telegraphing what they're doing. They're pre-selling what's going on so that when you hear the big bang, you will say, oh, yes, must be the jihadists. And they did exactly the same thing in the months leading up to 9/11. The media was saturated with Osama bin Laden and a horrible terrorist threat, and they were coming to get us. And at that point in time, bin Laden hadn't really done all that much to deserve that kind of news coverage. It was a sales campaign to make sure that when the World Trade Towers came crashing down, everybody would leap to the conclusion, oh, it must be Osama bin Laden, which is what all the corporate media talking heads were saying just as soon as it happened. Oh, yes, it's Osama bin Laden. That's what you'll believe. So it looks like they're getting ready to try another one. And I'm not the only person thinking so. There's a former U.S. Senate candidate, Mark Dankoff, was quoted over in SGT Report saying Israel is planning a false flag attack in the U.S. to create a war with Iran. All the pieces are falling into place here. Now, in response to growing pressure from the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, another Israeli company, Ahava, an Israeli cosmetics company, you see all their stuff in the little kiosks all over the shopping malls. They'll get right in front of you and say, here, buy this, and we can't because it's full of stuff that will make my wife sick. But Ahava is going to relocate its factories and offices from one of the illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank back to Israel proper. It's going to cost them about 10 million Israeli shekels to do. And it's good that they're doing it, and it shows that boycott, divestment, and sanctions is having an effect. Now, the anti-BDS drive is going to be a profitable business because Sheldon Adelson and Israel are putting together a war chest of 100 Israeli shekels, and they're hoping donors will swell that by 3 times to launch a media campaign against BDS. Oh, you're anti-Semites, it's whatever. And I had a great idea for an anti-BDS campaign for Sheldon Adelson to use. And I posted it to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. And it's a picture of Hillary Clinton saying, so what if Israel is stealing Palestinian lands? As I said at Benghazi, what difference does it make? So far, I have not had a return call from the anti-BDS people on that one here. But there's a little bit of a wrinkle people need to keep in mind. It's actually against the law not to support BDS because the settlements are illegal under international law. They're built on stolen land. Israel has committed war crimes in the West Bank. If you support Israel by opposing BDS, you are abetting war criminals by helping them finance what they're doing, by letting them just steal the land and build factories and so forth on it. So the anti-BDS people are aiding and abetting war crimes, and that's a message we need to get out there. Now, there's been an unfortunate incident up in Iran where some visitors from Saudi Arabia, pilgrims visiting the holy sites, succumbed to poisoning. This was at a hotel. A lot of people got sick. 4 people died. And it appears to be just a classic case of food poisoning. Now, Saudi Arabia is trying to turn this into a major political scandal. Oh, Iran has killed our people. And Iran said, no, it happens. And to put this all in perspective, yes, 4 people died in Iran. It's a terrible thing. But every year in the United States of America, 5,000 people die of food poisoning. Every single year. It's not an unusual thing to happen. And obviously Iran had no motive to target these Saudi pilgrims who represent not only, friends, but a source of revenue and income coming in on their pilgrimages. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, the United States is going to build yet another new military base in Iraq. Don't forget, they've built a couple since the last invasion that wound up not being used at all. But, hey, do it again. They're going to build a new military base in Iraq, and they're sending advisors to retake Ramadi. Now, if you are my age and you remember Vietnam, that's how we got stuck in there. We were sending advisors. They won't really be in combat. Of course not. And ultimately, 60,000 of those advisors died. So here we are with the third invasion of Iraq because those gosh darned Iraqis will not stay conquered. They will not bow down and worship their U.S. puppet government. What is wrong with those people? Don't they understand the rules that we just made up? So Obama is basically going to be sending hundreds more of your kids into Iraq. Not his own kids, of course, just yours, because that's what your kids are for. Now, over in Syria, the Syrian army, Assad's forces and Hezbollah are capturing more territory around Qalamon, and apparently doing very well against the hired mercenaries and the U.S.-supported ISIS. We're going on 4 years now. The U.S. has been trying to get Assad out. Huge amounts of money, huge amounts of lives. And by the way, here's one possible explanation for that $8.5 trillion the Pentagon says they don't know where it went. Those hired mercenaries are making big bucks. They're not on minimum wage over there. They're making huge amounts of money. And that's probably where a lot of this money from the Pentagon is being spent, but they don't want to admit it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Kaspersky Internet Security has found spyware linked to Israel on the computer systems of all the hotels being used by the negotiators at the P5+1. They also found signs that Israel was trying to break into Kaspersky's own security company and compromise them from within. So we know who's causing all the problems there. All righty, let's see. Protests mount against the U.S.-backed regime in Ukraine. Poroshenko's in trouble. More and more of the Western Ukrainians are surrounding his palace saying, get out. Impeach him, fire him, banish him, whatever it takes. Now, isn't it kind of funny? When it was the U.S.-sponsored coup d'etat in Kiev, the media was there. Oh, this is freedom in action. This is democracy. The people want a new government. And now that the people are out there saying we want the U.S. puppet gone, nothing in the American corporate media. We're supposed to pretend that everything is just hunky-dory over there in Kiev. The Ukrainians love their U.S. puppet ruler. Apparently not. Over at the G7, they're still cranking up the rhetoric, the war threats against Russia. Bad Russia. Russia's bad. Bad Russia. And they're tacitly acknowledging that it is Kiev breaking the Minsk Accords, but the sanctions are going to go on Russia. We have to punish Russia. Now, there's a very enlightening article over at SOTT.net, and it's pointing out something that you already know, but we're going to repeat it again. Despite all the propaganda from the White House, the G7, whatever, it is obvious Russia has got a lot better things to do than start World War III. They're open for business. They're making deals. They're building up their nation and its infrastructure, and they're building up their economy. It is the United States that has been backed into a corner in which a new world war appears to be their only way out. Because, hey, that worked the last two times. Russia does not want a world war. China does not want a world war. The U.S. wants Russia and China to be obedient vassal slaves. And Russia and China won't go along with that. In fact, the reason Russia got kicked out of the G8 is all the rest of the nations there would always do whatever the United States wanted to do. Whatever the U.S. says, that's what we say too. Russia wasn't going to go along with that. That's why Russia got kicked out. They wouldn't join the personality cult of his Obama-ness. I think President Obama has got some serious ego issues. They are clouding his thinking, seriously. Now, over in Egypt, there was a suicide bombing directed against tourists, but the police managed to keep the suicide bomber away from the tourists over at Luxor, near the Karnak Temple. And so they succeeded in doing that. Now, the State Department has issued a report saying that al-Sisi is pushing Egypt away from democracy. A year of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's presidency is showing negative progress towards an environment of democracy and human rights, which is exactly what the United States wanted when they kicked Morsi out. The Egyptian people kicked out Mubarak, U.S.-Israeli puppet. They put in the guy they wanted, Morsi. We can't have people choosing their own leaders, so they get Morsi out, put al-Sisi in. And like every other U.S. puppet ruler in history, he establishes a dictatorship. Every time the U.S. meddles with another company, they tell you, oh, we're bringing democracy to those people. It's never happened, not even once. Democracy only returns when the people of the nation kick that U.S. puppet ruler out. The anti-democratic trend in Egypt is exactly what the United States wanted when they kicked Morsi out, put al-Sisi in. CIA Director John Brennan is basically out there acknowledging that blowback from U.S. foreign policy is a reality. It does happen, but hey, it's somebody else's problem to deal with, is the usual attitude. By the time the blowback happens, I'll be out of public life and working as a consultant for the defense contractor. Somebody else will be in office. They'll take the heat for it. Somebody else gets to take the fall for the blowback. Okay? But there's a reality everybody needs to pay attention to when they talk about the war on terror and terrorists. And I mean real ones, not these manufactured fakes like Adam Gadon and Yusuf Al-Khattab and all these phonies who go out to the Holiday Inn and steal a towel, wrap it around their head and say, I'm a terrorist, come and get me, you schmucks. Nobody just gets up one morning and decides to be a terrorist for no reason. Nobody gets up and says, oh, there's nothing on TV. I think I'll go blow up a school bus. Hope I don't burn my lips on the exhaust pipe this time. These people in other countries don't hate us for our freedoms. People everywhere love freedom. Only tyrants and clergy hate freedom. The rest of the world hates the United States of America because at some point in their life there's been a horrendous blast, and people they've known all their lives are lying in bloody shreds at their feet, mixed in with the shrapnel stamped made in the USA. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Let's look at the economy, and we are now seeing the dawn of the petro-yuan. Gazprom in Russia is now settling all crude sales to China for the Chinese currency. They're not going through the dollar. The American banks don't make any money off the deal by charging fees and interest on these U.S. paper dollars. China and Russia are two major economies in the globe. This is a significant loss of revenue to Wall Street and the Federal Reserve, and it's the reason why both China and Russia are now on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Bit by bit, the world is turning away from the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them and drag them back in. This last April, the U.S. trade deficit hit a staggering $40.9 billion for the 1 month. More than $1 billion per day is leaving this country and not coming back. We are importing $40 billion worth of products into this country every month that are not balanced by exports going out. Why? Well, because those folks on Wall Street decided they didn't want to get their hands dirty with manufacturing or farming, We'll be the financier to the world because they have to come through the U.S. dollar. We'll be the private central bank to the planet. That was their thinking. It's not working. And now they're really stuck. We have seen our manufacturing decline in quality and quantity over the last 30, 40 years. We're not going to get it back overnight. We have destroyed our agricultural exports with this disastrous gamble on GMO, which was not for the benefit of the people, but to try and establish a food monopoly, to do to seed what the Federal Reserve tried to do with the dollar. Everybody has to come to America to get currency. Everybody has to come to America to get their seed for next year's food crop. That was the strategic objective of the GMO experiment. And that is falling apart. Now, the U.S. Consumer Sentiment Index is falling so far this month. And everybody was saying, what the heck is going on with the Dow? Because the stock market had a really good day today. If you knew it was going to happen ahead of time, the Dow closed 236 up. Everybody's going, huzzah, huzzah, led by various financial institutions and some high tech. And everyone will say, well, it's up. That's all that really matters. We don't care why it's up. Well, it could be up on the basis of absolutely rigged data. We know the unemployment number put out by the U.S. government is a total complete joke. Now we're starting to see indications that the earnings reports from top corporations are likewise being fictionalized to keep the stockholders happy. Anyway, over in New York City, the food banks are starting to run out of food. That's how bad things are. And apparently, in New York City, 1.4 million residents have to eat at these food pantries out of a total population of 8.5 million. The number is currently growing by 20% every single year. This is not an economy in recovery. It's still in decline. Got a long way to go to the bottom. And it may be accelerating. Over at investmentresearchdynamics.com, they have an article suggesting that a derivatives meltdown may have already started over the last 2 weeks, but it's being kept under wraps to avoid a panic. Mostly happening with the over-the-counter derivatives. And they draw a parallel with the movie Jurassic Park. You can hear the rumbling of the monster in the distance. You don't know where it's coming from, but you know it's coming. Now, the other day we were talking about this situation where Disney had given layoff notices to their IT workers, but before the IT workers left, they were required to train their foreign-born replacements in this country on H-1B visas because they're willing to work for less. And it's a short-sighted economic policy because domestic workers for Disney will take whatever they're being paid by Disney and spend it into the local economy, whereas these foreign workers tend to send significant portions of their pay back to their country of origin. It's another drain on the economy. And adding insult to injury, the story has now come out that the Disney Corporation put all of these let-go workers on a blacklist that disqualified them from being hired by any contractor that works with Disney. And I guess from Disney's point of view, their attitude is, well, you know, these workers aren't going to be happy with us. We should not let them be hired by any of our contractors. They'll just say bad things about us. But that's it. They let them go, force them to train their replacements, and then blacklist them from getting any job with any company that does business with Disney. And we're talking about employees who had absolutely spotless work records, excellent reviews. They just thought they were going to be able to get a job with a Disney contractor doing the same thing, and they're being told, sorry, you're on the Disney blacklist. And Disney's had this arrangement going for a lot of years, because I've run into it before. And it's looking more and more like somewhere in Mickey Mouse's family tree, there's a rat. All righty. Now, was on the news today, airlines are redefining the size of carry-on bags. As they cram more and more people into the passenger compartments, they're having to cram more and more carry-on into the overhead carry-on bins. They don't want to spend the money for larger bins or more floor space, so they're simply declaring that the maximum size for a carry-on bag will be thus and so smaller. And, of course, this is good news for the luggage companies who are already tooling up to make these new tiny itty-bitty bags. The bags that you're currently considering carry-on will be too big, and you will have to check them for a fee, which means TSA gets to go through them and help themselves to things that normally you would have in the cabin with you to prevent the TSA from stealing them. I remember when flying was fun and flying was comfortable. Now they're just city buses with wings. And then they wonder why people don't want to travel anymore. Alrighty, now over at TIGTA, they have a story going on that Obamacare is in yet another mess. The IRS is unable to verify qualifications for the subsidies. Remember the whole idea about the higher insurance policy prices? Don't worry. If you can't afford it, you can get an Obamacare subsidy. Most people aren't. The data that collected by these computerized exchanges is so corrupted, they're having to go through them by hand and try and figure out what the heck was intended. And the system is locked up. It's seriously backed up. And so people are being forced to pay these sky-high insurance premiums. They're unable to get the subsidies. Is there anything about Obamacare that is actually working? Anything at all? Well, it's working for the health insurance providers because they're already announcing double-digit premium increases as of next year. They're making money hand over fist, which was one of the real purposes of the Affordable Care Act, to make health care unaffordable and more profitable. And still, we have a president whose ego will not allow him to acknowledge he messed this up. He messed this up totally and won't admit it. We've got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the nanny state is totally out of control. I'm looking at the feed from Fox News. New York City is going to require salt warnings on all menus now. And San Francisco is going to ban soft drink advertising. I guess because they couldn't find anything better to try and prove they're actually doing a good job. Because they can't deal with the crashing economy, the unemployment, the out-of-control police. So let's go and tinker with something else that can't fight back. We're going to demonize salt. And by the way, without salt, your body shuts down. The clear part of your blood is actually seawater. From when our ancient forebears crawled out of the ocean. They took the ocean with them. That's what's inside your blood veins. It's a lot more concentrated in the real ocean now. That's what government does. We're coming up on an election year. They got to prove they're useful and necessary to you. They can't fix the roads, rails, schools, hospitals. Can't bring back the jobs. Can't get rid of the toxic additives in our food and medicine. So we're going to put warnings on salt, and we're going to ban soft drink advertising to prove how much you need us. We're going to take a phone call here. Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm just looking into the past and trying to uncover everything that I was told, and specifically about World War II and the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And the more I look into it, the more I believe that it never existed. Like, why would the Germans make the effort of giving the Jewish people uniforms and stamping their hands and shaving them if they're all just going to be thrown in the oven to begin with?
Well, you know, there are a lot of reasons to doubt the official story of the Holocaust, which was basically the foundation on Israel's political justification of taking Palestine away from the Palestinians. Bad things happen in World War II. I've been to Germany. I've toured a couple of the camps, and the curators there are very honest in saying these were slave labor camps. The deaths were all from the typhus epidemics that swept Germany in the closing months of World War II. You know, basically coming out of World War II, what was going on is the Zionists wanted to establish their Jewish homeland in Palestine. By the way, Hitler had offered them Madagascar. When the German Jews said, we need a homeland of our own, and Hitler said, well, we're going to conquer Africa anyway, we'll just give you Madagascar. They didn't want it, though. They wanted the Holy Land in the Bible. And here you had a situation where the entire world had united and sacrificed much blood and treasure to defeat Germany on the principle that one people do not have the right to march into somebody else's home and just take it over for their own use. And yet that was exactly what the founders of Israel wanted to do to Palestine. And so they needed a propaganda device that was so powerful it would convince everybody who had joined in the campaign against the Nazis to look back and say, well, I guess in this one case, yeah, it's something that we've got to do. And that is the point at which the slave labor camps became death camps, delousing became gassing, deaths by typhus became deliberate extermination. And because it is this lie on which Israel was founded, they have protected it hammer and tong up to this very, very day. And they're going all around the world, literally getting laws passed that you can't question that official story. And, of course, that is dictatorship. That's not freedom, when you're not allowed to even ask a question. And it is simply by these methods that we understand something is being protected. Because when I grew up, I believed the official Orthodox story. But when I started seeing how people who questioned the official story were being treated, the light bulb went off, and I said, oh, there's something to this for this reaction. Because you don't see people who claim to have seen Bigfoot thrown in jail. You don't see people who claim to have gone for a ride in a flying saucer lose their careers. It is the sheer ferocity. Yeah, it's the sheer ferocity of force that's brought to bear on those who question the official story that tells us something is being hidden. Truth doesn't need laws to defend it. Truth survives re-examination. Truth welcomes questions. All throughout history, from Galileo to Zundel, only lies and liars resort to the courts to enforce adherence to dogma.
Now, my understanding of the war was Germany housed Jewish people after they fled from Russia.
Yes, they did.
And after the Germans were winning the war, after the first couple of years, the Zionists approached Great Britain with the Balfour Declaration.
Yes.
And they got America into the war. Then after the war, Germany found out about the Balfour Declaration, and that's why they became resentful towards the Jewish people.
Well, that's only a tiny, tiny part of it. The other part of it was, of course, that Germany broke free of their private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles, and just turned Germany's economy around. And during the Weimar Republic inflationary period, Germany was looking at all these Jewish people that they had welcomed in from Russia following the pogroms, and saw how they were basically practicing these very predatory financial games on the population, and it just built up a huge amount of resentment, especially when you had literally headlines around the world. Judea declares war on Germany, and they were trying to organize a boycott to destroy Germany's new economy and force them to accept a new private central bank. And that basically was the friction that led up to a lot of the hostility toward primarily Jews and financial interests. But they were pushed into the corner here. The goal of World War II was to basically destroy Germany's new resurgent economy, because an economy that is not enslaved to a private central bank is just going to be incredibly powerful. Economies that are slave to private central banks can't compete with free, fair economies. They just can't. It's impossible, because too much of the wealth is being siphoned off for the pockets of the private central bankers. And so every time a nation tries to break free of private central banking, whether it's Germany or the young United States, immediately all the other nations that are enslaved to private central banks gang up on them to force them back into that slavery. And they're really close to basically locking the whole world into this system. I think there's only 3 nations left on Earth that are not enslaved to Rothschild-type private central banks.
All this history that I've learned in the past, none of these things came to pass.
You're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to know that. I mean, history is a joke played on the vanquished by the victors in front of an audience that dares not laugh. You need to go and read my article, the article version of All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. There's a lot of material in there. We're constantly adding new stuff in there. And it lays out how this war between fair economies and private central banking is the root cause of much of the history of the 20th century and now going into the 21st.
Now, how bad was Germany? I mean, I know they attacked Poland and Czechoslovakia, but I'm learning that they had a lot of people that were in those territories were getting abused. Yeah,
that's absolutely true. There was cause. Let's put it in simple terms, okay? Both sides were right. Both sides were wrong. Both sides did good things. Both sides did bad things. There's nothing black or white in wars or assassination. No war is ever fought for a single reason. Okay, you have the winners and the losers, and the winners get to write the history books. That's not as certain as it used to be because of the age of the Internet. We, the people, are writing our own history books for future generations.
Yeah, and war is hell.
Yeah, sometimes the peace can be really annoying, too.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Mike. I just want to hear your opinion on it, everything.
Okay.
What my understanding was.
All right, well,
okay,
thank you very much. Yeah, a lot of what you are taught as history in school is absolute junk. It's not what happened, it's what they want you to think happened, because we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, and we were right to go in and destroy their country and bomb their cities and all this other stuff. And yes, they deserved everything we did to them. All righty, we're almost to the top of the hour news break here. We're getting more and more information coming out of Congress about the secret trade treaties. And why are they secret? We're hearing that a lot of congressmen, in fact, all the congressmen, everybody who wants to actually read the treaty in that secret room is required to sign a non-disclosure form that they will not reveal to their constituents or the media what they're seeing. And most members of Congress who are supporting Obamacare are admitting they haven't actually bothered to read it. It's just another USA Patriot Act. The boss says sign it, we will sign it, mahi dictum est, and all will be well. No, it isn't. Look how bad the USA Patriot Act is. These trade treaties promise to be much worse. If it were for the benefit of the people, they wouldn't need to keep it secret. Got to take a break for the news, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Now, yesterday, there were telephone bomb threats made to both the White House and Congress. And there was an evacuation of the press room, search for a bomb, nothing came up. And yesterday, I said, this feels like a PR stunt to try and prove why constant surveillance of every phone call is necessary, because while the NSA was ordered to stop the bulk collection is when the threat came in. It was a PR stunt. And supporting that theory, we are now getting the story. Apparently, when the White House press room was evacuated because of the bomb threat, the first family and all the White House employees just stayed right where they were. They were not evacuated. Only the reporters who are going to write about the bomb threat, let's get them out of here and rattle them up. If they had taken the bomb threat seriously, obviously the Obamas and the staffers would be evacuated, probably even ahead of the press room. So it's a PR stunt to say, see, we need constant NSA bulk surveillance of all phone calls so that we can find who is sending in these horrible bomb threats. Look for what should be there and isn't. And what wasn't there was the Obamas being taken to safety. Same thing that we had all the way back on 9/11, when President Bush was sitting in that school at Sarasota, Florida, supposedly knowing planes had crashed into the World Trade Towers, some kind of a terror attack was underway, and the Secret Service just lets him sit there, reading about pet goats, marking time until he gets out to make his speech about America being under attack. Because, in theory, at that moment, nobody knew how many planes were flying over the country, crashing into buildings. Obama's presence in that school had been advertised in the media 3 days ahead of the appearance, and there was an airport only 4 miles away. Look for what should be there and isn't. Now then, over at Fox News, Judge Jeanine has torn into Obama over his most respected country claim. We wagged our finger at that one ourselves when he first came out. And basically, she is responding to Obama's claim that he has personally restored the United States as the most respected country on earth. And that really is absurd. First of all, to say that America is the most respected country on earth, it certainly is not. It's the most feared, but not the most respected. And then to take credit for that himself, President Obama, has made the United States the most respected country on earth. And I'm not surprised that they're taking him to task on that. And we're seeing more and more signs of a man whose ego's gotten totally out of control. Along with the fact that he can never admit that any of his programs are not working, such as Obamacare. Why he is still pushing this global warming carbon tax agenda as hard as he can despite several record-setting winters in a row. Alrighty, apparently more emails have surfaced from the Internal Revenue Service regarding the targeting of activists. And the IRS emails confirm that they knew targeting of activists and critics of Obama was wrong and illegal, but they simply did not care. They were absolutely convinced they would never be prosecuted. And, in point of fact, nobody has. The Department of Justice continues to refuse to prosecute Lois Lerner for contempt. Because they're above the law, don't you know? All right, Hillary is apparently attempting to recapture the youth market, or the youth vote. She's going to have a fundraiser with Bon Jovi in New Jersey. It's going to take place on June 29th. The tickets are hideously expensive. $1,000 for the cheapest ticket and $2,700 for the premium seating. And I'm going to take a prediction here that between Hillary's lack of contact with the youth voter and the sheer economic realities of New Jersey, that this is going to turn out to be a bust. Now, you remember not too long ago there was a big scandal that came up about Jeff Epstein and his private little orgy island down in the Caribbean, which was filled with all these underage girls who were giving naked massages. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. And a lot of very rich and powerful people were visiting that island, including Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and Alan Dershowitz. Now, when the story broke, Alan Dershowitz launched a lawsuit for defamation, saying this is absolute nonsense. Yes, I was on the island, but I would never touch one of these little girls. Alan Dershowitz, of course, will sue at the drop of a hat. He's suing right now an establishment because he slipped on water and fell in the restroom. And he says it's their fault because they hadn't had paper towels in that restroom for over an hour. And that's why there was an accumulation of water on the ground, which I don't know what Alan Dershowitz is doing in a men's room for an entire hour, but that's what he's saying. And now we're getting word that Bill Clinton is trying to get Alan Dershowitz to drop the lawsuit because there's going to be no way that this gets reported in the media without reminding everybody that Bill Clinton was down there on the little orgy island. And nobody's going to believe that Bill Clinton wasn't diddling the little girls based on his past track record. So it's going to be kind of fun to see how this comes out. Anyway. Now, Jeb Bush is out there campaigning, and he's made a very interesting statement. Okay, he's over in Berlin right now, and he's saying, you know, he wants voters to remember his father's role in the Cold War, not his brother's role in Iraq. You forget all about that Iraq. Remember how George H.W. Bush did in the Cold War, and he's trying to basically shift it. Well, what I come away with from that comment is, okay, if you vote for a Bush, you get a war. I get it. Not going to vote for you. So, anyway. Interesting article over at News with Views. How much media fraud will America tolerate? And it's basically saying what we already know. Corporate media is absolutely, totally under the control of the federal government, the Israeli government, corporate America. It is nonstop propaganda and distraction. And how much longer is this going to go on? Well, it's going to go on as long as corporate interests are willing to underwrite these propaganda factories. And they're already doing it at huge loss because the audience just isn't there, but they're going to keep on pounding on it. And they're trying to basically mandate that there'll be TV sets in all public places like airports and bus stations tuned into the propaganda channel, just like the telescreen in Orwell's 1984. They were ubiquitous. You can't get away from them. It's constant haranguing, Big Brother's support for war and everything. But the reality is that they've lost most of their audience. And the majority of Americans, especially, thankfully, young Americans, are now getting all their news and information from here online in the independent media. And that is a really reassuring thing because, unfortunately, that next younger generation, they are going to pay the price for our failure to get this situation back under control. And that's why we have to work so much harder. The highest moral imperative any of us have is to leave to the next generation a better world than was left to us. My generation has failed that obligation miserably. Okay, over in The Guardian, they're running an online, constantly updated webpage about police shootings in the United States of America. So far this year, 247 white people have been killed by U.S. police as opposed to 140 blacks. No, it is not a racist issue. It's a police brutality issue. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here and getting into the area of abuse of police, which unfortunately is a constant theme. And as that constantly updated site that we just talked about points out, the police are killing more white people than black people in the United States. This is not a racist issue. They're trying to spin it as racism because racism is a useful issue to wag about during next year's elections. But the reality is the police are shooting and killing more white people than black people in the United States right now. It's not racism. It's brutality. It's repression. It's oppression. Now, over in Baltimore, the court there has rejected the request from State Prosecutor Marilyn Mosby for a gag order on the Freddie Gray case. She's trying to keep a lid on all of it. She doesn't want the autopsy to be released. She wants a ban on any discussion in the media of any relevant information. And the court didn't really take too very long to come on down and say, no, you don't have grounds for this, for a gag order. These are all supposed to be public records. They're produced at taxpayer expense. They are the property of the people, and the people have a right to see them. Now, apparently some emails have surfaced showing that State Prosecutor Mosby intentionally directed the police to mount an operation in the area where Freddie Gray was killed to get a handle on drug dealing. And maybe that is why she wants a lid on this, because it looks like they were targeting that particular neighborhood. They were profiling. Now, over in Indiana, 50 students have tested positive for exposure to tuberculosis, and we need to be very clear what we're saying here. Okay, the little skin test that they give you, I had to go through one to be allowed to teach over at UH, will reveal you've been exposed to tuberculosis, but you may not actually have it. You've just developed the antibodies to it. But they've had 48 positive skin tests from students who were exposed to the one student that they know actually has it. Now, tuberculosis was considered eradicated in the United States for the last 2 decades and had been trending down. And all of a sudden, it's popping up all over the place. Gee, I wonder who brought this tuberculosis into the U.S. Well, we know that many of those illegal immigrants being welcomed into the country are carrying serious communicable diseases. Scabies, H1N1, HIV, and yes, tuberculosis. But that's okay. It'll stimulate the economy because all these Americans will get sick and they'll have to go to the doctor and they'll have to spend money at the hospital and at the pharmacies, and it'll be good for everybody, for all Americans to be sick. Because that's what life under fascism is like here. Now, a little bit of good news up in Oregon. In Jackson County, a judge has upheld Jackson County's ban on genetically engineered crops. It was passed last year, democratically, and of course the GMO companies came in and said, no, you can't do that, we're saving the world. And unlike Maui, the judge held up the will of the people. That's very, very good news. Now, we are starting to see more and more studies surface that are contradicting Monsanto's claim that their genetically engineered food varieties produce much more food than the natural varieties, and that the only way we will prevent starvation on planet Earth is to sign on to the GMO bandwagon. But we're seeing more and more of these studies showing up where organically produced crops are basically neck and neck. In many cases, the natural varieties are producing larger yields than the GMO yields. It's just another selling point. You will have more crop to sell. It'll be resistant to weeds. It'll be resistant to insects. And all of those claims have now been disproven. The BT crops that produce that BT toxin as an insecticide, the insects have evolved to tolerate it. There's a whole new generation of super weeds that have evolved to be glyphosate tolerant. They've actually managed to co-op the gene from the Roundup Ready crops, so they are now Roundup Ready weeds. Now, in response to public pressure, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is getting ready to put out what they call a non-GMO label, just like the USDA certified organic. But you need to be a little bit careful. The USDA is taking the position that they can take the word of the provider, and the only requirement to get the USDA's non-GMO label is to provide paperwork to the USDA saying, we promise you this is not GMO. There is no outside independent confirmation. Nobody's running tests. And we know that the USDA certified organic label does not mean 100% organic. It really kind of means mostly organic with allowed levels of chemicals and, yes, even GMO in there. It's just more government trying to protect corporate profits. Because right now there's a huge demand for non-GMO organic food. And it all has to be imported from other countries because America's farms are all but completely compromised. Over in India, they're starting to relaunch traditional organic natural farming methods, and they're making money hand over fist because everybody in the world wants to buy what they're selling. Okay, now let's see here. Looks like somebody's trying to hack my server. I'm going to have to deal with that in this next commercial break. Lobster prices, if you're a lobster lover coming from New England, I am. Lobster prices are surging due to the cold ocean temperatures. During this last winter, we were getting all these stories about fish farms all along the Northeast up into Greenland, where the water got so cold the fish stocks died. And apparently the extreme cold has suppressed the population of lobsters as well in that part of the world. They're not finding as many. The Arctic sea ice continues to track as it did in 2006. The Arctic sea ice right now is the thickest it's been since 2006 and nearly the same thickness it was back in 1940. This just after the time when Al Gore insisted the Arctic would be ice-free. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break here. More about global warming and a phone call when we get back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're going to go right to the phones here. We're going to talk to Al up in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. Thank you for waiting through the commercial break. And what's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hope you're well. You were talking about health care earlier. Now, up in Canada, we have universal health care. We all pay into it, and so it's in our best interest to be healthy because, health care would cost more. Whereas in your country, it's in the rich people's best interest for you to be sick.
Yes.
So that they can make a bunch of money off of you.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of wondering, what exactly do you envision as a healthcare system that you would think?
Well, based on the, either, single payer, the Canadian model, or the French model, There are ways to run a healthcare system if the health of the public is the priority and the agenda. But in the United States of America, everything is being turned into a privatized, for-profit, money-making operation just because the money junkies are in charge and because too much of our entire economic system is so deeply in debt that grabbing more of those pieces of paper and ink is now their top priority, and all of the considerations have been rescinded.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed as of late especially is, Canada kind of follows the trend of the United States, especially politically now. But I have to say this, I've been down to the United States a lot. And I actually worked down there for a few years, on and off, a couple of weeks at a time. But your country does have the most amount of freedom compared to the rest of the countries in the world. Is like if we could merge Canada, I'm not saying do this. I'm saying if we could merge the best of both countries, it would be a great place to live. Unfortunately, as well as you and I both know that'll never happen because how could the rich stay rich that way?
Well, you're absolutely right, but there is a group that wants to merge Canada, the U.S., and Mexico together into what's called the North American Union, but before they can drop those borders, the standard of living in the U.S. and Canada has to be brought down to the standard of living in Mexico, or everybody would simply run across the border. Well, they're already doing that. They're flooding into the United States from Mexico. And so that is definitely the agenda there. And again, it is not for the benefit of we the people. It's for the benefit of the money junkies to have a larger pool of workers. They always want a surplus of workers relative to the available jobs so that they can keep wages and salaries low. And that's
exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's all about, getting more zeros behind their name than the next guy. I mean, these people, you go to bed at night, reading the Forbes 500 list and dreaming of moving their name up just another notch there.
Yeah, they're probably psychopaths as well.
Sociopaths, definitely sociopaths.
Yeah, definitely. But like for me, my wife and I, we're a little younger than you, but we don't need a lot of money to live on. So we've adjusted our lifestyle. I mean, we don't work full time, and I can't imagine, having to actually work full time to pay, for my life to live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's Mike, you got a great website, you got a great show. It always comes back to the same thing, and you keep repeating it over and over again because people have to realize we have to end this debt-based monetary system. It does no one any good except the rich, and we ain't in that club.
No, we're not in that club at all. Basically what it is we need to get rid of the idea that having more wealth than you need to be comfortable represents an achievement and an accomplishment. We need to recognize it as symptoms of an addiction to money. Money's very addicting. It's more addicting than cocaine and meth and heroin. And we need to get rid of this idea that certain individuals or groups have a natural right to more of life's blessings than any other individual or group. And yeah, I'm like you. I don't need to be a multi-millionaire. I just like to be comfortable. I'd like to have enough money to go on producing my wife's music and getting her albums and everything out there. And some little science experiments on the side, and I'd be perfectly happy. I don't need to see my name in Forbes or any of that other nonsense. The people who do are exhibiting symptoms of a serious mental illness, and it's amazing with the American Psychiatric Diagnostic Manual. Any human behavior at all is deemed a mental illness for which they have a pill, except for this unrelenting desire for more wealth. And it isn't just that these people need to see themselves wealthy. They can't feel wealthy until they see everybody else around them poor. Because wealth is a relative measure.
Mike, that they actually, and you know as well, they actually have this remedy for people that want to eat healthy, but these people that are junkies, money junkies, there's nothing they could do for them, apparently.
They don't want to do anything for them because they're writing all the checks for all of these institutions and everything. Yeah. That is amazing. The desire to eat healthy organic food has been declared a mental illness, but the desire to have all the money of a country in your own pocket that's a perfect sign of sanity. I mean, that's how screwed up our society is.
Yes, I want to control the world, and I'm totally sane by wanting to do that. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
It is. Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to human-caused global warming, and there's an interesting article over at Stephen Goddard. The Arctic catastrophe for the alarmists continues. And that is that once again, all of the dire warnings and prognostications that the carbon Nazis were putting out there back in the 1990s simply didn't come to pass. The polar bears didn't drown. The Arctic ice caps didn't disappear. Snow and ice are not a thing of the past. Now, this summer so far, the numbers for melting on Greenland are not good for the global warming hysterics. Normally, 30% of the island is showing signs of surface melting by this point in the year. This year, it's only 5%. Now, remember, back in the 1990s, they were screaming that in 20 years, the head of Greenpeace stated on TV, in 20 years, Greenland would have no ice at all. That, too, didn't happen. In fact, Greenland has a little bit more ice than it did back when he made that prediction. Now, the carbon Nazis love to grab a high temperature and say, see, we have a temperature of 100 degrees here. That proves global warming. The part they're not telling you is the count of hot days, where you have days of over 90 degrees or over 100 degree temperatures. And you just keep account of how often that occurs, because that's actually a much more accurate indicator of warming than simply saying, oh, over here at the airport we have a thermometer surrounded by passenger jets belching out tons of burning kerosene, and it says the temperature's 102 degrees. It's the end of the world if you don't pay a carbon tax. The frequency of days where we have temperatures over 90 or 100 degrees has plummeted since the 1930s. Yes, we occasionally get temperatures 90 and 100. We get fewer of those days. Not to be deterred by reality, however, the carbon Nazis are still going at it. And over at the G7, they're agreeing to decarbonize the global economy by the end of the century, which is safe for them to say. They're not going to be around till the end of the century. But it sounds good in the media. Carbon is bad. Do you have a viable replacement for it yet? I don't think so. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I was looking at the Fox feed over the commercial break here, and they were running this story about how Bob Costas is slamming ESPN for giving Caitlyn Jenner their Courage Award. And normally I wouldn't bother with this nonsense. But I have to agree with Bob Costas. Okay? They're out there saying, oh, how wonderful Bruce became Caitlyn. It showed courage, and we should applaud, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'll give you a real study in courage. Remember Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning? Did exactly the same thing that Bruce did. The media continues to ignore her because her real act of courage was blowing the whistle on U.S. war crimes. But we're going to go with this athlete whose face was on the cereal boxes, and, oh, we're going to make a big deal about it. And, you know, ta-da, ta-da, new heroine of the transgender community. And Chelsea Manning gets ignored, even though the crimes Chelsea Manning uncovered impact us all. And Caitlyn's surgery doesn't affect anybody except Caitlyn. We're being conditized right now by the corporate media, and they're even trying to bring back the Chandra Levy case. They've granted a new trial to the guy who got convicted of her murder. And they're saying, oh, there were irregularities, and yes, we're going to have a whole new trial about the murder of Chandra Levy, so we can use that as a distraction and keep you all bamboozled about what's really going on in the world. Because pay no attention to what's going on at the G7 or the Bilderbergers or Syria or Iraq or any of those places. Just, you know, you want to pay attention to Caitlyn, and you want to pay attention to Chandra Levy, and you want to pay attention to the latest sports stars and the latest movies in the theaters that you're not going to as much as we want. All righty, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call. I don't have a name or location, but whoever you are, welcome to the show, and what would you like to talk about?
Hey, Mike, it's Lori in Oklahoma City. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Lori.
Good. And I'm so glad you talked about Caitlin. Oh, my gosh. I've just been wondering all day. Okay, onward. I wanted to call about you talked earlier about the USDA and GMO labeling and all that. And I just wanted to remind people that we don't need to listen to what the USDA does in relation to GMO labeling, because there's an alternative to paying attention to an agency that you know is going to lie to you anyway, and that's the Non-GMO Project. You're probably familiar with it.
I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah, they've been around since 2005, and they do a great job identifying food products that are non-GMO.
I have them permanently linked to the browser in my smartphone when I go around the store. I mean, I look for that. This stuff, it isn't just that this isn't, particularly healthy food. It is dangerous.
It is.
Okay.
And I have to make a disclaimer. I work for Whole Foods Market. I have for the last 15 years. But this is part of my job. That's why I know that the Non-GMO Project education side of it is working, because I see the results of their education efforts at work. Every quarter, I print the signage to hang on all the items in the store that have been verified non-GMO, and there's thousands now. So if people just go to the non-GMOproject.org site and look at the logo, that'll help you find them easier because it's on all the packages. And it really is independently verified it was started by independent grocers and growers that realize the impacts of non-GMO.
Okay, give us that website one more time.
It's non-GMOproject.org.
All right. Well, I'm going to put a link to your site from my site, and people need to look at that.
Oh, no, that's the project site. Yeah, that's the Non-GMO Project site. It's a nonprofit organization. They've been around since 2005, and there's lots of companies now that are getting on the bandwagon, which is why one of the reasons I'm glad to see at Whole Foods that I do that, because they're at least. We can label it ourselves. We don't need the USDA.
Well, see, what's going on here is, Monsanto is fighting an uphill battle to ban GMO labeling. They really can't justify this idea that we, the people, are not allowed to know what is actually in the food they sell us to put into our mouths and our bodies. And so what they're trying to do is hijack organic and GMO through the government, just like the USDA's certified organic. It's not really 100% organic. They're just saying it only has a little bit of chemicals and only has a little bit of GMO.
Yeah, they've diluted the organic label.
And what they're doing, this new USDA non-GMO label, all a food company needs to do to get it is simply send in paperwork saying, we promise you it's non-GMO. There's no independent verification or checking, and they're hoping that people will see this USDA non-GMO, and they'll simply stop thinking at that point and buy the product to protect corporate profits, and that's exactly what's going on.
Well, that's what I love about the Non-GMO Project idea in general, because it just shows that we don't need them. We don't need them. They're numbers. They're lying studies. They're this and that. They're sponsorship. I mean, we can figure it out for ourselves. Don't pay no attention to them.
I don't pay attention to them. This government's completely illegitimate. It's completely illegal. It's completely in the pockets of the money junkies. Right. It is hardcore fascist economic dictatorship, and no, I'm not paying any attention to them.
That's right. And we are smart enough and intelligent enough to communicate our own information, ourselves.
Yeah, and
thank you, Mike, for all you do.
All right, you've got it. Thank you very much. Here, we're going to let you go. And yeah, we have to take responsibility for our own health and safety in the face of a government which clearly is willing to sell out our health and what's good for us for a fast buck. And remember, from their point of view, they need you to be chronically ill because that stimulates the economy. You'll have to go buy medicine. You'll have to buy hospital stays. You'll have to buy all of this. And, of course, where that economic theory breaks down is where do we get all the money for this more expensive medical care, the more expensive health insurance? That's why the system is breaking down. They're all focused on taking more away from us. And nobody's focused on how do we allow the working people to trade their labor and services and skills for new wealth to pump back into the system. They forgot that little part of the economic cycle, and that's why we're in serious trouble. Going to take another phone call here. Arash out in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? Thank you for taking my call.
I'm doing great.
You brought Excellent. You brought up global warming, but I lost reception when you were talking about it. And recently I've been thinking that the powers that be that want to implement this carbon tax, maybe within the past, I mean, like, if we know that the global temperature is actually cooling, I'm sure they know as well, like, within the past, 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking they want to implement this carbon tax as soon as possible, because they do realize that the global temperature is dropping, and they're going to blame this, or they're going to blame this drop in temperature on the carbon tax, and be like, hey, look, the carbon tax is working, or our temperatures are dropping.
I disagree. If they were going to do that, I mean, in the face of the fact that temperatures have been dropping, real scientists would have said, hey, we solved the problem, and they go on to something else here. Just this week, we're starting to see media articles coming out saying, we were wrong. There never was a pause in global warming. It's just been continuously warming temperatures, and it's getting faster. They're trying to panic us all into paying this carbon tax. And beyond the carbon tax for our desperately broken and troubled government, I think that the globalists want to base the demand for a global government on this idea that we icky-poo humans are destroying the planet, and for our own good, there has to be a global environmental dictatorship that tells us how to live our lives. And I'm really thinking that this human-caused global warming is one of the key foundations for bringing on the global government. And the problem I have with that is if you set up any government on the basis of lies, by default that government has to be the worst dictatorship in history in order to survive its own creation by fraud. And, that's what's coming on. And I'm opposed to global government anyway, because these people don't know what they're doing. They're lifelong politicians and money junkies. Look how badly they screwed up Obamacare. Do you want that kind of quality medical care on the entire planet?
They can't govern a municipality. You think they're gonna be apt in governing a planet? Like, it's just ridiculous.
No, they can't govern a planet. They can't even govern themselves. They're down on Jeff Epstein's island going after the hot little underage girls. These are people without any self-control, let alone the ability to manage a planet.
Right. And speaking of GMOs, I just wanted to mention the fact that there's only a handful of GMOs out there. It's corn, rapeseed oil or canola oil. There's papayas from Hawaii, and yellow squash, cotton. If you're eating a whole food diet, then you'll be able to avoid them. But
yeah, but they're trying to basically bring GMO into virtually everything, because the real strategic goal of this program is to make the world dependent on a U.S. corporation to produce any food in the future. They want to do with food what the Federal Reserve tried to do with the dollar, but that's failing, and so is this Monsanto plan. Arash, I have to let you go here. We got to take a break for the top of the news. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, of course, we're seeing the run-up to the pending Supreme Court decision regarding Obamacare, and everybody's out there saying, well, most of the states that will be affected, they have GOP governors, and this could be political payback. And everyone's trying to weave a web of consequences and that may just not even be there. They miswrote the law is what it came down to. I think in the end that whatever machinations led to the Supreme Court passing Obamacare in the first place will be repeated, because Obama can never be wrong. He is always right. No matter how wrong he may be, he is always right. Really seeing symptoms of megalomania there in the Oval Office. Apparently, George Osborne is going to start selling off the Royal Bank of Scotland. As you know, it was taken under public ownership when it got into trouble following 2008. And now that it stopped losing money, paid for by the taxpayers, and it's looking like it might actually become profitable again, they're going to sell it back into private hands. Isn't that a wonderful deal? While it's losing money, it's publicly owned. While it's making money, back in private hands. And they wonder why taxpayers are upset about this. All right, I want to spend a little time talking about something that's been making the rounds on the Internet. We have been seeing a lot of seismic and volcanic activity around the globe. Mount Sakurajima in this very southern tip of Japan is erupting rather continuously, but a lot of attention is now being focused on Mount Sinabung down in Indonesia. And they're concerned because Mount Sinabung, which is clearly showing signs of an impending eruption, is only about 24 miles away from the northwestern tip of Lake Toba. And there are sporadic reports that people living around Lake Toba are seeing steam come from the ground, and they're smelling hydrogen sulfide. Now, unfortunately, down in that part of the world, they don't have a lot of money for volcano monitoring. You've probably already heard about the Yellowstone supervolcano. A lot of money. Everybody wants to go work at Yellowstone, and they're studying that supervolcano. But the Toba supervolcano is actually considerably larger. And I want to lay out some bits and pieces of information for you to keep in mind as we talk about this and see this story develop. Right now, as I said, these reports about gas and steam around Toba are sporadic, not a lot of confirmation about it yet. But 24 miles is not a very long distance geologically speaking. And a lot of people think that Mount Sinabung is part of the same magma chamber as Toba. Now, Mount Sinabung may be acting as a safety release valve, which would be a good thing. I want to keep that in mind. Now, what makes volcanic prediction down in that part of the world difficult is the magma there is very stiff, very thick, and it produces what are called stratovolcanoes. These are the volcanoes that just go right up into the sky, very sharp peaks to them, very, very steep slopes, because the lava cools and hardens very, very quickly. It's very rigid, very, very brittle. It doesn't flex a lot. It doesn't give away clues about what's going on inside. Now, that's in contrast to the volcanoes we have here in Hawaii, which are called shield volcanoes because they look like an old shield lying on the ocean. They're very shallow because the magma coming up here in Hawaii is very thin. It flows very readily downhill, and that's the difference between the two types of volcanoes. Stratovolcanoes, when they erupt, they tend to be explosive because it is a brittle, hard shell over the source of pressure. And they don't announce too much ahead of time what they're going to do. When Krakatau erupted, they had earthquakes only a couple of days before it went. And when Krakatau erupted, barographs showed that the shock wave circled the Earth no less than 3 times. Were Toba to erupt, there is no question we would hear it here in Hawaii, along with being on the receiving edge of much of the ash and gas from it. It would be considerably larger than Yellowstone. So we're going to keep an eye on this, but it could very well be that Sinabung is going to actually relieve the pressure on the magma chamber and things will settle back down, and hopefully the steam and gas that is being reported around Lake Toba is just a shallow deposit that got shaken loose. I did look at the U.S. Geological Survey for the global seismic network. It's not showing any quake activity down there around Lake Toba. Of course, the downside is it's also not showing earthquake activity around Mount Sakurajima because volcanoes are not earthquakes. It's a completely different situation. I've been unable to confirm if there are tilt meters around Lake Toba, but we're going to keep an eye on that. Mother Earth could just pull a really fast one on the global warming people and say, well, 12 record-setting winters didn't convince you. Let's just have a volcanic winter. Because the last time Toba erupted, it dropped the temperature of planet Earth by 5 degrees centigrade and accelerated entry into the last great ice age. Just something to keep in mind. So let's talk about vaccines. California lawmakers have now passed their controversial school vaccine bill. Senate Bill 277 is intended to boost vaccination rates, meaning vaccination profits, by mandating all school children be vaccinated. And a lot of arguments on both sides. A lot of parents went in there and say, we don't want this stuff in our kids. People were making the point that basically children who refuse to be profit centers for the pharmaceutical corporations are going to be denied an education. They're being sequestered out. Oh, you refuse to believe as we tell you to believe. Well, then you don't even get an education. I'm sorry, but if the parents are paying property taxes, they have a right to send their kids to school. And if vaccines were proven safe and effective, there wouldn't be a debate. The reason there's a debate is because there are legitimate concerns. Remember, in the recent measles, mumps, and whooping cough outbreaks, the vast majority of the patients who came down with those illnesses, 90%, had had the vaccinations for those illnesses. At the very least, we can say the vaccines didn't work, and at worst, were actually causing the illness. And CDC admits children who are vaccinated for these diseases can give the diseases to children around them. But that's okay, it builds more business. Now, the American Medical Association has signed on board with this California bill and is now saying every state in the union should have the same bill. Your child cannot go to school until you have paid to have these some 38, 39 different vaccines pumped into the kid's arm. And you will not be allowed to opt out for any reason unless you can get a note from a doctor saying this vaccine will be harmful to this child. I think in California there's a major phenomenon where there are recent graduates of medical schools setting up in doctors' offices that do nothing but write prescriptions for medical marijuana. And I am predicting there will be a boom in doctors' businesses that do nothing but write exemptions for the vaccine for parents who know that these things are not safe, they're dangerous, they're harmful. Now then, down in Mississippi, just a little point to make about this whole vaccine issue. Mississippi has the highest infant vaccine rate in the entire country. And they also have the highest infant mortality rate in the country. Oh, but it's got nothing to do with the vaccines. It's all shaken baby syndrome. It's sudden unexplained infant death syndrome. It's, a respiratory failure of an unknown sort and all these other names that they use. Your children's lives are being sacrificed for corporate profit. We'll be right back. Aloha, welcome back to the show. We're talking about vaccines, and basically what's going on here is the business model of the big pharmaceutical companies has changed. They're not satisfied with making money selling medicine to sick people, especially because if the medicine doesn't work, the families of the sick people tend to sue a lot. So the new model is find a way to sell medication to perfectly healthy people who do not really need it. Ooh, swine flu's coming, get a swine flu vaccination. Bird flu's coming, get a bird flu vaccination. MERS is on the horizon, get a MERS vaccination. It's just like the old traveling Wild West medicine show salesman would drive into the middle of a town in his brightly painted wagon, crank that stage on the back down there. They'd have music and noise and hoochie coochie girl dancing around to draw a crowd, and the pitchman would get out there and say, my friends, out there on the far edges of the Great Plains, there is a plague laying waste to the Native American population, and it's coming this way. And the only way that you will save you and your loved ones is to buy a bottle of Dr. Mike's Fixins for only 10 cents. And the townspeople will buy the bottles, which contain water and pepper oil and anything that the pitchman found out in the desert to throw in there for flavoring. And the medicine show salesman would drive out of town. And he's happy, he's got the money. Townspeople would drink the bottle of nothing, think they were safe from a plague that never existed in the first place, and they'd go home happy. And that's exactly how our current pharmaceutical corporations are operating. Remember the big swine flu panic in 2009, and it turned out that the when pigs fly flu, because it was a splice between pig and bird and everything else they could throw in there over at the laboratory. And it turned out that flu was less severe than the normal seasonal flus. But by golly, they made a lot of money panicking everybody into buying Tamiflu, which turned out to actually be less effective against the flu than ordinary acetaminophen, which is also, I might add, much cheaper. That's how they're operating. There's a wonderful movie called The Constant Gardener. I've mentioned it before. Ralph Fiennes and Rachel Weisz. It's loosely based on a true story. And it's about basically big pharmaceutical companies carrying out tests of a new drug in Africa and concealing the deaths so they can go to market and say, hey, we're sure this is absolutely, positively safe. And it's a very, very good movie. And there's this wonderful line in there where Ralph Fiennes has tracked down this other doctor who knows what's been going on. And this other doctor, I can see his face, I can't remember the actor's name. And he says, I put the big pharmaceutical corporations right up there with the weapons dealers. And he's absolutely right. It's just a fantastic way to make huge amounts of money, enough to corrupt the government to support what you're doing. So here are some facts about the vaccine industry that the corporate media still will not touch. Vaccines still contain mercury compounds like thimerosal. The CDC even admits it. Now, back before 9/11, there was a huge body of evidence linking the use of mercury-based preservatives with the epidemic of autism that is sweeping the American nation. And following the Homeland Security Act, which indemnified vaccine makers as strategically important to dealing with biological terror attacks, the research was basically dropped. There was no way to sue. And despite promises of just phasing out thimerosal, it's still there. The CDC opens it. Now, there is no safe level of exposure of mercury injected into a human child. Even what is considered trace levels are considered dangerous. There is no evidence that mercury is safe in any amount whatsoever. Now, another fact about vaccines. Injecting any substance into the human body makes it orders of magnitude more toxic because it bypasses all the body's normal defense systems in the skin, in the digestive tract. They're taking things that you evolved to eat and injecting them into your bloodstream, like peanut oil, which is used as an adjuvant. Now, an adjuvant is a fancy name for anything that will provoke an immune response. The theory is that they will put in what they hope are attenuated pathogens for the particular vaccine and these adjuvants to irritate the body and provoke a reaction. The idea being that it will build antibodies to this pathogen, but it also builds antibodies to the adjuvants. And there is a direct causal link between the use of peanut oil as a vaccine adjuvant and the epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis, which is afflicting our population. And what they don't want you remembering are all the mistakes they've made, like the 1976 swine flu vaccination campaign, which killed 50 times as many people as the flu itself. Now, I grew up in an age where everybody was getting the mandatory polio vaccination, and it turned out that vaccine actually contained cancer viruses. This was admitted by a top Merck vaccine scientist named Hillman. It used to be on the CDC's website. They've now Orwellized it. You're not supposed to know that a big part of the cancer epidemic of the last couple of decades was triggered by this vaccine. More virologists working for Merck have blown the whistle and gone public with the claim that the company routinely fabricates lab results to claim a 95% efficacy rate of its mumps vaccine in order to continue receiving government contracts on a vaccine that really didn't work. Remember, we reported, I think it was just yesterday, where Merck is now trying to duck the civil liability for their antidepressant Zoloft causing birth defects in babies carried by women on the medication, and documents have surfaced that Merck's own scientists warned them this can cause birth defects. And Merck went out and sold it anyway. Went into court saying, we had no idea this could be a problem. Really, we're willing to pay a few pennies to these people to pay for their damaged babies' hearts. And it turns out they did know. As we mentioned before, every time you hear about an outbreak these days, mumps, measles, whooping cough, it turns out the majority of the children who get these illnesses had already been vaccinated. At the very least, the vaccines are not working. At worst, they're causing the illnesses. Because most vaccines today rely on what are called attenuated pathogens. In other words, they'll take the virus that causes measles, and they'll take it into a laboratory, and they'll put on their boxing gloves, and they'll punch it silly, so that it hopefully can't actually cause the illness anymore. Then they put it in the vaccine along with the peanut oil and aluminum and all the rest of that stuff, shoot it into the kid. But there is a long history of attenuated pathogens reverting to full potency once they're administered. They had that problem with the oral polio vaccine. We now have this polio-like illness sweeping our population, which they insist isn't polio. It's got the symptoms, but trust us, it's not really polio because, after all, these people had the polio vaccine. More about vaccines when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there is a book out there called Dissolving Illusions by Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. And it goes back and it looks at the history of these supposed successful vaccination campaigns and shows that in point of fact, the illnesses being vaccinated against were already in decline when the vaccines were introduced. And the vaccine companies simply took credit for the passing of the illness. And she documents it with polio and with measles. Measles was almost completely eradicated before the arrival of the measles vaccines. Now we're getting measles epidemics all over the place in kids who have been given the measles vaccine. Now, here's something that would make a lot of sense. Let's have a study of overall health of vaccinated children versus unvaccinated children. It's never been done. They'll never do it. Because the unvaccinated children would turn out to be healthier, smarter, better off, less autistic, better immune systems. Fewer behavioral disorders, fewer allergies, fewer autoimmune disorders. Look at the Amish people who still refuse to vaccinate their children. They have near zero rates of autism. And now, of course, the AMA is out there saying, well, just because you're Amish means you can't refuse. We will stick these needles into your kids. We're crippling future generations of Americans for a fast buck today. All righty, let's see here. By the way, interesting little story. This is over in Extra Public TV. A former salesman for Merck and Company, not with the company any longer, has gone public saying that under no circumstances is he going to vaccinate his son. Almost 70% of doctors will not take the vaccines they prescribe, nor will they allow their children to be vaccinated. I'm telling you, in California and every place else, there's going to be a boom in instant overnight doctors' offices, and yes, there'll be real doctors with a license and a medical degree, and their entire business is going to be writing vaccine exemption notes. Just like they have these doctors' offices writing prescriptions for medical marijuana. Now, over in Ireland, survivors of the Gardasil disaster have launched their own support group. And there's an organization called REGRET, standing for Reactions and Effects of Gardasil Resulting in Extreme Trauma. Nice little acronym. Basically forming a support group for all these young girls who have suffered permanent medical harm, including infertility, from Gardasil. Do you realize right now we live in a world where our doctors are more dangerous than guns? You are almost 17 times more likely to be killed by a medical mistake than by a gun. And that's not adding in all the things the doctor is doing he thinks is correct that cause harm, like the vaccines. All these people out there saying guns are bad, we've got to control guns, we've got to get this gun violence under control, and you don't hear them people word about getting the doctors back to actually worrying about our health and taking care of us, rather than acting as salesmen for the medical supply companies. Remember, on that Gardasil shot, it's an expensive shot. It's $300. Whoever's flinging that needle around gets half of that. They are financially incentivized to pump this stuff into your daughter's arm. And now they're trying to say, oh, we got to give it to boys too. Really? I have a serious doubt that boys suffer any kind of a risk for cervical cancer. Call me silly. Saying, oh, the boys can pass it along. Well, if the girls are already vaccinated, who cares if the boy is passing it along? Oh, no, we got to stick it into... It's all driven by the money. They're propping up the entire economy right now by forcing you to buy things you don't want and don't need at inflated prices. Vaccines, health insurance, headphones for your cell phone, little doohickeys for the car. It's all about forcing you to buy more stuff. Government-mandated purchases. It's another form of covert taxation on you. When the government leaves you a tiny fraction of your wealth and then they come in and say, oh, by the way, you need to take some of that money we let you keep and you need to spend it here and here and here and here and here. You've got to have solar cells this, you've got to have water purification that, you've got to have this and you've got to have that. All to stimulate the economy for their favorite corporate cronies. Now, there is another article out here we link to. Donald W. Miller, Jr., MD, and he's talking about fallacies in modern medicine, and he's reviving the debate about whether or not the HIV virus is actually the cause of AIDS. And there have been numerous documented cases of people who test positive for the HIV virus but do not develop the symptoms of AIDS. And there are people who've got AIDS where the HIV virus cannot be found in their body. Were they looking down a wrong course of action? And what's really interesting is seeing how the medical establishment, the medical industrial complex, reacts to people who are asking this question. They're called AIDS deniers. Like they're the climate deniers and the Holocaust deniers. They're deniers. You don't even need to listen to them. Again, the same tactics of smear and dismiss and shout down without addressing the question being asked. Because way back when AIDS became a major issue and profit center, there was a race to find the cause and get a patent on it. Huge amounts of money at stake, and it led to this prolonged, nasty battle between Robert Gallo and the Pasteur Institute, which both thought that they had found the link between HIV and AIDS, and that shouting match overshadowed early concerns that both Gallo and Pasteur had gone down a wrong track. But now there's a huge investment in all these treatments for AIDS. Nobody's looking for a cure. They want treatments. If they cure AIDS, you go away. They never get any more money from you. But if they've got a treatment, you are there month after month after month after month supporting their bottom line. And they don't want to go back and say, oh, God, it was wrong. We're treating you for the wrong thing. Because everybody who's being treated for AIDS at huge expense still dies of AIDS. We've reached a point where we've allowed the money junkies to corrupt every other aspect of our society. Healthcare, science itself. The other day, I just chanced across a copy of that National Geographic. Had a cover story about why do people not trust science? And the article tried to lump in people's concerns about GMO and vaccines with people who think the Apollo moon landings are faked and, the Earth is still flat. And, typical poison the well kind of propaganda tactics. But we shouldn't trust science. Science was never about trust. Anytime they say, trust me, they're selling you something. Science is about reproducibility of results. And if the results cannot be reproduced, it is not science. It's a sales pitch. They're using white laboratory coats to bamboozle you. Oh, if he's wearing a white laboratory coat, he's above reproach. He's above sin. We should just believe what he tells us to believe. That candy bars represent good nutrition for your mid-morning snack. That's actually been done a couple of years ago. They got a very well-funded scientific report funded by a candy company that eating their candy bars was actually healthy nutrition. We're living in a country right now where the FDA is saying that bars made out of whole nuts and grains and coconut are not healthy, but flaming hot Cheetos are. That's how absurd it's gotten. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And apparently last Friday, former British Petroleum executive David Rainey was found not guilty of one count of lying to federal investigators about the true extent of the Deepwater Horizon oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. And that means not a single British Petroleum executive is held accountable for the worst environmental disaster in American history. Imagine my shock. They're oil executives. We can't touch them. The law only applies to ordinary people on the street, workers, the plebes, the slaves. They have to obey the law. But, bankers and pharmaceutical executives and oil executives, oh, no, we can't touch them. They're holy people. They wear three-piece suits. We're not allowed to arrest and jail people in three-piece suits. Speaking of which, a wearer of three-piece suits, Harold Hamm, prominent oil tycoon, is going to war against anybody calling into question the safety and productivity of the fracking industry. He's gone to the University of Oklahoma and literally ordered them to fire scientists who were studying links between fracking and earthquakes. Now, this is absurd. We have seen very clearly that in the areas in the Midwest where fracking is taking place, there is a sudden surge in seismic activity. We know that pumping liquids into fractures and fault zones will trigger earthquakes. It happened many, many years ago out at 29 Palms in Southern California, when the military decided to get rid of some very toxic chemicals by just pumping them down into this earthquake fault that nobody was using anyway. And as soon as they started pumping, and it wasn't even high-pressure pumping, they got a swarm of small quakes. Because it's just like, the hydraulic lift in the garage. You can have a little tiny pedal in the cylinder, and it's going to lift a huge amount of weight because of the advantage of hydraulics. And Harold Hamm seems to be one of those executives who think that it's perfectly okay to be going out and causing all kinds of damage with their economic activity. We'll solve it by just silencing anybody who says there's a problem. And apparently, he's actually lobbying for the University of Oklahoma to shut down the entire department. Apparently, he's a big donor to the university, and the regents are saying, we can't live without this oil tycoon's money, so we're going to have to change education to not offend the money. That's not what education's supposed to be about. Certainly not at the university level. Now, the EPA has done a flip-flop on the issue of fracking water, whether or not it is safe to drink. Had a story over in Patriot Rising, where the EPA actually, some weeks back, decreed the natural gas-producing hydraulic fracturing process has no detrimental effect on the safety of groundwater. Well, apparently the laughter was so severe that the EPA reversed course and said that, fracking can contaminate drinking water. I guess there's something to all these videos of people turning on their water taps and able to set fire to what's coming out of there. And they're saying, there's an issue there. And the latest EPA study is now confirming fracking has contaminated drinking water in 11 states, including California. A big part of their drought problem is that fracking has contaminated 2 of the state's largest freshwater aquifers. The water shortage in California is so severe, we're now seeing water theft. Stealing water, cutting into other people's pipes, literally hijacking tankers of water. That's how bad it is out there. Now, there's another study coming out of the University of Pittsburgh. And what they have basically done is gone out and surveyed birth weights of newborn babies in various areas of the country, including areas where there are fracking wells and areas where there are not. And they have found a very clear correlation Pregnant parents who live in close proximity to the fracking wells have babies with lower birth weights than parents who are living in areas where fracking is not taking place. They haven't traced down exactly what's going on. Is it the additional methane in the air, which is toxic? Is it other fracking chemicals in trace amounts in the water? But there is a clear correlation. And the U.S. government is getting very, very concerned about all the public awareness of toxic chemicals. So apparently they're looking at a bill, Senate 697, the Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act. And what it does is it says from now on, the U.S. government's designation as to what is safe and what is not will depend entirely on what the chemical companies themselves say. Doesn't matter if independent research shows the chemicals to be carcinogenic or harmful in any other way. If the chemical company writes a document saying this is safe, that will be the official position of the U.S. government under this Senate bill. Just like they're doing with the new USDA GMO-free label. As long as the company tells us it's GMO-free, that's good enough for us. We're just so naive and trusting over here in the government. We believe corporations, everything that they say. I mean, government used to justify its power and authority and its taxes, saying that they were standing as a bulwark against abuse by the corporations against the people. Now they're totally on board. Yeah, whatever the corporation says, that's fine. One of the reasons the Deepwater Horizon disaster happened is the Minerals Management Service, which officially is supposed to oversee these mining and drilling operations, was basically acting like they were there as sales support. They absolutely ignored all the safety violations going on. In most oil-producing nations on Earth, automatic blowout preventers are required, but they cost $500,000 each. You start putting those, mandating those for all those wells in the Gulf of Mexico, some executive's going to have to forego his bonus. We can't allow that to happen. So they rely on the manual blowout preventers. But the manual blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig was 4 years overdue for mandatory maintenance. And we're not talking something sitting in a closet. We're talking hardware that is being used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in a hostile environment of high-pressure corrosive salt water. Another report that TEPCO is having to deliberately dump radioactive wastewater from Fukushima into the ocean. We're looking at an article coming out of Investment Watch blog. The west coast of North America, by next year, 2016, will have 80% as much Fukushima radiation as Japan itself does. It's spread across the Pacific. Means by 2017, it's going to be doubling back here to Hawaii. Now, Greenpeace took a look at the latest Fukushima Daiichi IAEA accident report, and they've come up and said there are major shortcomings and outright misstatements. The IAEA report on Fukushima fails to address many highly important issues. It's another whitewash. Fukushima, it's old news. You don't need to. Remember what Ann Coulter said, a little radiation is good for you. But I didn't see Ann Coulter over there with a shovel helping to clean up the mess. All righty. If you are a single person and you are out there on dating sites, you might want to be careful because authorities have just arrested the executives operating a dating site. I don't have the name of the actual site. They had 2.7 million users paid to be on there. They only had one actual female member. All the other women on the site were paid fakes to sit on the site and answer mail from the men to keep the money coming on in. It's amazing, amazing. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get something useful done with the rest of the day. Still pounding away on the new version of WhatReallyHappened.com. It's slow going, but we're getting there. I am still hoping to have the new site debut sometime this month. So thank you for your patience. I'm not going to start it until I know it's going to work. And thank you for your patience and understanding. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.